in any case, let's talk about this idea that with both of your Yetzers, right? You come to love Hashem. This is the idea of the fire from above consuming the animal that you place on the altar, right? Meeting your Mesiras Nefesh that you have to subjugate yourself. All of a sudden, you're consumed with this fire. And we're saying is that this is, here, take it from 4 lines down on page Dalit in your packets there, which we're in chapter 2, right in the middle of the 4th line. If it says Dezeh Ba, if you can see that, everyone, 4 lines down, page Dalit, Dezeh Ba. Here's Ruvi, Baruch Hashem. We're now called Asara Shiyoshim Ba'oskim B'Torah. We're now 10 people sitting and occupying ourselves in Torah. So the Shekhinah is heavily dwelling upon us. In any case, Zeh Sheba, you see that? All day Slavshus and Nefesh Elokis B'Nefesh Bahamis, right? So what happens is the godly soul comes and cloaks itself, garbs itself into the animal soul. This is the idea of the fire coming down and consuming the animal, which means that suddenly even your animal is eyes wide open for Elokus. In other words, your animal can be trained, right? And it can get excited to run after mitzvahs. It can hop out of bed like eager to learn Chassidus if it's consumed by the godly soul. How does that happen? A little bit of sacrifice, a little bit of coming close, moving the needle on your side, and it itself will be your greatest ally. The Techila, in the beginning, in other words, your animal soul on its own, before it meets your godly soul, it does not have any knowledge or feeling for godliness at all. In other words, it doesn't speak that language, right? It doesn't have an appreciation in any way whatsoever. What's a mitzvah? What's Torah? It doesn't have pleasure in those things. What's pleasure about? Wrapping yourself in leather. You know, I mean, don't get me wrong. Amnam al yedei slavshus hanefesh elokis. Right, but when the godly soul will encloak itself in there, in other words, slavshus means enclosure. And I pointed out at the end of yesterday's class that. And again, I'm like a walking commercial for Chabad Hasidus, but what is Chabad Hasidus? It is the notion that the Alter Rebbe put into letters of language that can be understood in the human brain, not the soul's brain, for the first time in human history, all that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai showed us in the cave, which up until the Alter Rebbe, mamash up until the Alter Rebbe, was something that unless you had some kind of a very high level soul, you weren't really getting what was going on there. You weren't picking up what was being put down, right? It was inspiring to look at this language of the Torah, which was like an angelic language, and it was amazing to realize that the Torah contains godly wisdom, and it was unmistakably godly wisdom. It's just that it wasn't the godly wisdom that you understood, because it was in a language of the soul. And so people read the Zohar, people read the Kisvei Arizal, but 1 in a million actually had the intellectual grasp of what was being said there, because it wasn't speaking the language of humanity. Until the Alter Rebbe, he did something crazy, right? He did something which was impossible. He basically ushered in the days of Mashiach by doing it. He explained spirituality to the mind of an animal.
Whoa.
Yeah, that's why it's called Chabad Hasidus. It became Chochmah Bina and Das, right? And so the idea is that now there's an availability for the animal, for the godly soul to encloak itself into the mind of the animal. It didn't happen before. It wasn't available. The animal never was able to speak that language of Torah. It could speak legal language of Torah. It could speak poetic language of Torah. It could speak, what are the other languages of Torah? Sort of the stories of the Torah, the agadas of the Torah, the tales. The animal soul could understand those things which were understandable, but the deepest secrets were not yet put in a form that was understandable to the animal soul. And so suddenly you can sit there and grasp the deepest secrets. That's the enclosure of the godly soul into the animal soul at a level of mystery. And when you're misbonus eloki, and when you do meditate on this deep godly understanding, and you're taking a topic that even the animal soul can understand, right? Then what happens is your nefesh bahamis also comes close. In other words, its eyes open to a godly truth, which was not available to it before. Right, that there becomes a what's called a chakika klalis. What's that? Like a general engravement, right? Like you're gonna, I guess when you're gonna start, let's say taking a sheet of metal, and you're gonna try and like have letters come out of it. So you know what I'm talking about? Like you can like read something that you bang out the metal and make letters. So this is basically like a general engravement. So all of a sudden form starts to appear out of like formlessness. Like before that, your animal soul was just like a dense piece of metal. There's no intelligence involved there, right? It doesn't even know from intelligence. Letters are not really part of that like golem. But all of a sudden, when you start to be born in a godly meditation, in a language that the animal soul understands, it starts to have this general engravement, and letters start to form inside of the animal soul's perception. And therefore, godliness itself suddenly becomes something understandable. Just like the animal soul understands simple lusts and pleasures, it suddenly understands, how awesome Torah is, like in a simple human way. Then what happens if you wind up managing to get your animal on board? Then it says this famous pasuk, Rav Tevuos Bekoach Shor. What does it mean? There's much grain with the power of an ox, right? So the idea is if you're plowing your field and you've got a big hoe, right? And you're going to go through the field trying to tear up this intense level of hard ground. Good luck putting that yoke on your back and like doing sprints, right? You're a little guy. What are you going to do? It's going to take you forever. Maybe you'll never even get there. But if you put it on an ox, you can plow the field. So it says you can get much more grain, much more utility out of an ox than you can out of a man. If you can get the ox working for the man. If the ox is working for itself, it's a big balagan, it's a goring ox, it's a problem. You have to tame it. But once you've tamed it, then the man can use it, and it gets the man further than the man can get on his own. And this is like the great secret of Hasidus, basically, is that the animal soul is not the enemy. It's not something you have to turn and run away from. It's bad. You're a gaiva. I'm going to beat you up. That was the old way. Now we want to explain to the animal itself that it actually can give something to the soul that the soul doesn't have in its own. And that the animal like basically feels loved and wants to participate in this game because it has not only imagined value, it has true value, that if you get your animal soul going for you, it's stronger in a certain sense than the godly soul. Just like an animal is physically stronger than a man, right? You transform it from its animalistic nature, and it goes up just like the offering on the altar. It goes up and gets included in this burning desire of a godly fire. And your animal soul, why did you come into this world in the first place, right? On one hand, right? Remember we talked about this. There's an advantage of light over darkness. So on one hand, you could say Hashem put us in this crazy dark place because it's good for the godly soul, in the sense that we meet a challenge and more power comes out of us by being in this place. But it's not the end game. The end game is that the actual animal itself contains the deepest, highest levels of godliness, even higher than the souls. And therefore, you ultimately come in not to fend yourself away from the animal and to sort of, suppress it, but ultimately to get it on your side. Then you get more grain with the power of an ox. It actually unleashes much more godliness than your soul could have, even the highest chambers of Gan Eden. So you're sent down into this soul. I love it. You're sent down into this world, not just to fight this battle and bring out deeper kochos, but to unleash the power that can only be found in this lowly world.
So
I think David had a question first. He had his hand up, and he's still kind of holding it up there.
Yeah. I'm just with this analogy we're using, like our animal soul is a behemoth, is a domesticated animal, it's an ox. But a lot of time, it's represented as a chamor, like a donkey, like.
Well, in a sense,
those are domesticated.
But
they're not kosher.
Yeah.
I mean, in a sense, that when we say the chamor, right? There's such a thing called chumrius and gashmius.
Yeah.
Gashmius is just pure physicality.
Yeah.
Chumrius is already like a corrupted form of physicality. It's like materialism.
Okay.
So when you're talking about your chamor, when you call yourself a donkey, which we sometimes do, We're talking about when you're like really engrossed in materialism, and then you have to transform that into chomer. The word chomer also means material, literally. It means material. Like you want to go to the store, like to buy yourself some paints and some like stuff to build your house. It's called chomer, right? So it's the same idea though. You're using the materialism of yourself and transforming it. But
Okay.
you want to say?
Yeah. So before you had given kind of like a mushal where you have like fire and the fire wants to continue to go up, and then you have water which like sort of like tames it. So is that the same thing here? Like, is that basically what you're saying? Like the power of the animal soul is to keep you grounded and to do mitzvos in this world, and that's what gets the soul higher than if the soul didn't actually have that. Is that like concept there?
The analogy, I guess, is that the soul, like just like fire, right? It cannot actually burn and show its majesty unless it's connected to something on the ground. So your godly soul's fire is actually helplessly unable to show itself unless it's connected to the animal soul. So it's not just that you're trying to get the animal excited too, it's that you're trying to reveal the godly soul, and the godly soul's fire can, just like a fire in the world, it can only be fire if it's stuck to the wick and consuming chomer, right? So like the smoke that comes up, like when you, like the idea that the wax is melting down, that's basically like your animal's soul constantly like removing its own sense of gaiva, right, and yeshus, and that itself is what makes the fire stay on the wick. As soon as you run out of the chomer, or it's not like you have the laws of Shabbos, right? Vamed madlika. There's a whole Mishnah like what can you use for a wick on Shabbos? You have to use oils that are going to actually get consumed properly and enable like the sort of healthy balance of the flame and the erosion of the wax or the oil. So the idea is that erosion of yourself, right, is essentially taking the worldliness and turning it into fire. It's both positive for the worldliness and for the fire. It gives the worldliness its true purpose, which is to basically disintegrate into elokus, and it gives the fire its ability to reveal itself. That the true fire cannot show itself unless it's connected to its job of undoing the worldliness. Make sense? Missing something there?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on. So we're going to be right at the end of that period, but we said the last two words on the line. Just like a physical carbon, what does the carbon do? Right? It refines what's called the sparks of datzach. What's datzach? Domem tzomeach chai. Domem is inanimate, tzomeach is growing, chai is animal. How does the carbon refine sparks of inanimate, growing, and animal? Boaz? Sorry, you look like you're spaced now. I'm going to bring you back in. How does the carbon elevate the sparks of the inanimate, the growing, and the animal?
The korban within us? Or
No, the carbon on the altar. It's straightforward, not hard.
Burns it.
Every carbon has elements of inanimate, growing, and animal. That's what a carbon is. Where's the inanimate element of every carbon?
The alpha.
No.
What?
Stones?
The salt.
The salt. Ah.
You can't, it's al tash
Yeah, the
bismelech.
stones,
You
yeah.
cannot not, every carbon is a special mitzvah. You have to put salt on every carbon. Why? It's because it becomes the shliach, the representative of the whole world of inanimate. That every time you have a carbon, you're taking the inanimate reality of this world, rocks and everything about them, through their agent of salt, and it has to go on every carbon. Then you have the vegetation. What's that? What is it?
The wood.
No.
Not even
The wood is already inanimate as well at that point because it's been cut, right? It's not living. I guess it's all like that. You're right. Yeah, you're right. It's all cut. But what's the idea? You have to have the meal
flour.
offering
The flour,
and
yeah.
libations, right? So that's your area, I guess the wood as well. And that's your area of, although it's interesting if the wood is considered to be a carbon. The Rebbe ultimately says that it is a carbon on its own right, but it's not necessarily part of the carbon of that's on top of it. In any case, and then you have the animal.
What's libations?
Libations is
Wine.
you have to know, you're a Kohen. It's the wine that's poured on the altar on every sacrifice, right?
So-
I don't know why they call it libations. It's kind of a fancy word for pouring wine.
Why would wine be considered living but salt would not?
No,
They're both
I
food,
kind
no?
of stumbled into that myself here. No, but salt is essentially from the inanimate species. Wine was at least at one time alive, right? It was growing.
What does wood represent as a korban?
Wood is a deep thing, not for now. I mean, it's a whole conversation. But essentially, the idea of wood is that it's very, very expensive.
Yeah.
It's like the most expensive thing. You need tons of it, and it didn't grow easily. So the person who sacrificed the wood, the Rebbe has a whole sicha. Usually, he speaks about it at his father's yurtzeit, because his father's yurtzeit is Chaf Av, was one of the days that it was a holiday for a particular family that donated wood to the altar. And the idea there is that this person was ready to spend tons and tons of money for a sacrifice that didn't really get called by his name. It's not really part of the sacrifice. It's kind of like just this lowly guy that like is doing a job that no one appreciates because it's not even important. And he's doing it for somebody else who's like a sinner, right? Oftentimes it's going to be a sin offering that's being burnt. So he's basically sacrificing himself in order to enable another Jew at great personal cost, in order to get another Jew to get who's a lowly person who had sin, and so they made a holiday to celebrate like this Mesiras Nefesh, and he was basically saying that that's like the highest thing in a certain sense. Anyway, back to the point. So every sacrifice is exactly what we just said spiritually. What you're doing, right? You're taking your animal and you're basically transforming it into something godly. And it's exactly what every sacrifice did in the temple. It took from all the different levels of reality, datzach, domim tzumeach chai, and it brought all those sparks of kedusha up into a godly service, into the fire of the Beis HaMikdash. Same thing is true with your spiritual sacrifice. It's like we said about this candle, right? You're taking the wax and you're transforming it into a fire, and you're refining and transforming the darkness of the animal soul into light. And that's what the pasuk is, right? We're talking about Moshe was the seventh, and he brought the Shekhinah down to earth. And how did he? And this was all sort of summarized in this one mitzvah of make me a mikdash, and I will dwell within them. Which means that our job is to do what Moshe did, make ourselves do a mikdash, and Hashem will dwell within us inside of each and every one. That through your service at the level of iskafia, which is basically just getting your animal onto the altar, and the purpose of that is ultimately to get to a point of transformation. The animal actually internalizes the message of God and gets caught up in a godly fire. Not just that it sacrifices itself and moves the needle and gets onto the altar, but ultimately that's supposed to lead to an actual turning of the animal into something godly. We said that this line is going to come up over and over again. When you subdue the Sitra Achra, reveal the glory of God in all the worlds. What do we say was the glory of God in all the worlds went on? Not that the glory of God comes in each and every world into its own limitation, but the glory of God which is equal in all the worlds, i.e. that which is imperceptible equally in all the worlds because it's soved, infinite light. That's what you reveal when you do this process of bringing a carbon, right? Or vagila b'china. So I can't like explain enough. This is the whole point of this mimer, that with the souls of Atzilus, with like infinite godly dimensions of understanding, even Moshe Rabbeinu. Why is it Moshe Rabbeinu daven 515 prayers to get into Eretz Yisrael? He wasn't okay already just being Moshe Rabbeinu, mamish giving Torah to the Jewish people? Because what you accomplish by refining the world and doing physical mitzvahs is infinitely greater even than Moshe Rabbeinu himself, right? Simple. That's why he davened so much. He wanted to get into the Eretz, into the Aretz, and to do gashmiistic things. He wanted to just grow crops and give truma. What's the big deal? That would have been a higher level than Moshe Rabbeinu's own mamash hasagas on Har Sinai. So I have to explain to you like how precious. Again, this is the Hasidic. Why do I have to get busy telling you to stop being arrogant? Why don't I just tell you that every time you mamash get out of bed on time, you're drawing down the Or Sovev, you'll stop being arrogant all on your own, right? You'll run to get the Or Sovev. The preciousness of what's before you. Yeah.
All right, so I just want to clarify. So we have our normal parameters of being human, where we have our
I mean,
faults
speak
and-
for yourself, but yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah. We have our normal parameters of being like human, and we have all these different faults and all these different character traits that need to be refined and all that sort of stuff. And that's very, very enmeshed in our animal soul. So the things that, like, if you have an angry personality, you work on your anger. If you don't know not enough chesed, you try to be kind to other people. If you got different addictions and different problems, like, you work on like refining that. By virtue of studying Torah Chassidus, like the panemius of Torah,
Right.
we go into like the deepest rectifications of a person possible.
Yeah.
But it's all in order so that we subjugate the animal soul, not to banish it, not to separate it, not to like cordon it off,
No,
but to
because
but to
it contains the deepest powers.
like the wild ox, which was like subjugated, and now you can grow crops.
Right.
With one hoeing
Right.
like 100 years, you
Yeah.
can't do what an ox does
In one day.
in one day, just
Right.
like going through. So how do we then get like the ox to work for us? How do we get the animal soul to work for us? Because innately, like, for example, like
I'm saying we answered that, right? In a sense, I'm going to say Chabad Hasidus, but before they had Chabad Hasidus, they did it in such a way that, let's say, for example, learning Gemara was satisfying intellectually as well to the animal soul, right? Or learning halacha, or learning stories, or learning Agadah, or like, in other words, when the animal soul understands Torah. Now, again, I'm saying that the secrets of the Torah were not permitted. They weren't. The permission was not granted to have that in a language that the animal soul could understand until the Alter Rebbe. But there was other parts of Torah that could be understood by every human being. And so when the animal soul, when you dragged it over and like explained to it, you know, the value of thinking deeply and you know, logically and understanding sort of like, in other words, there's goyim that are lawyers, right? There's goyim that are doctors. When you explain like seichel, right? Or there's also like more spiritual pleasures that you can get the godly soul to like enjoy a healthy lifestyle as well. When you can explain godliness to the animal soul and whatever level of godliness you're talking about, that's how you get it to work for you.
Yeah, but what do you do? Like, for example, I'm just going to use myself as an example. I have this problem with smoking cigarettes, right? And I thought I'll try. I tried various times to quit, and every time was incredibly difficult. But I freaked out. Like my body reacted negatively. I had a very emotional hook.
Right.
Like now I've been like 3 days without cigarettes. It's been very gentle. It's been
Mazel
very
tov,
easy.
mazel tov. Good for you.
The thing that like I wanted to just like, I thought instead of just like forcing myself to quit smoking, I'll just put as much light in as possible until like I'm so full of light that I can just like let go and just like finally stop smoking cigarettes, which is, it seems like that's kind of work because I've put in the effort and I've studied hard. But then you're saying you sacrifice the animal soul, so that's I've sacrificed that part of myself. I've taken that and like I've used that to live a better life, so that like instead of wasting time smoking cigarettes, I'm gonna study maybe a little bit more Torah, maybe have a little bit more focus because I'm not thinking about wanting to smoke cigarettes. But you're also saying that we transform the animal soul, and we sacrifice it, and we make it better. Like how am I supposed to challenge that like desire? How does that desire then translate across to something greater?
All right, that's a question I can talk about for a second. I don't want to get too off board, but there is a beautiful mimer from the Alter Rebbe about the Sreifas Hapara, which is basically the mitzvah of Para Aduma, right? Zos Chukas Hapara. You know the Para Aduma is when we burn the red heifer in order to make it to ashes that we can then sprinkle and enliven the dead. So he speaks over there about the notion of what happens when you burn the ox is that it remains ashes. And whenever you burn anything, including this ox, there's a release of the other elements that were combined in this thing that you're burning before you burn it. In other words, what I'm trying to say is everything in this world is made up of fire, earth, air, and water. According to the Rambam, sort of like medieval physics, right? That everything is some kind of a combination of those four things. So even fire alone is a combination in this world of water, air, right? There's nothing that's not a combination of these four elements. When you put fire onto one of the things in this world, it serves to release the other elements, right? More or less. And it basically settles on taking the air, water, and fire elements out of the thing, and leaving it with just the earth element, right? So now, where am I going with this? And why is this such like an important mitzvah that you burn the red heifer is like the number one craziest mitzvah in the whole Torah? It's really like the secret of life, because these four elements, right, represent four different aspects of the animal soul. That you're burning this cow, it's basically what you're doing is you're burning away. The fire is the arrogance, right? The water is like the pleasure. The air is the frivolousness. This is what also as it says in Tanya. And we get down to the ashes. The ashes is basically what's called the essence of the animal soul, which is pure desire, right? And the thing is, if the desire of the animal soul is like sort of injected with negativity, so it will pop up as a desire for water, like lust after the flesh, or it will go into air, which will want to speak lashon hara. That's where the desire will be fueled, or it will go into what's the other one? Fire, which is arrogance, right? So if you take the essential power of desire, and you sort of let it go astray, it winds up sort of puffing itself up into one of these three areas of klippa. And this, by the way, is what we call the four levels of klippa. There's klippas noga, and there's three impure levels of klippa. They're connected with fire, water, and air, right? And the essential earth is the klippas noga, which is it's noga, which means it could go either way. You can drag it into negativity, but the whole idea of burning the cow down to ashes is you're basically saying, let me take my animal soul back down to its essence, and then now I've isolated it, I can put that desire into fire, water, and air of Kedusha.
Yeah.
And that's why you pour the water onto it, and basically it winds up enlivening the dead. What is the dead? It's like all those areas of your life where you didn't have kedushin and they're like dead moments. You can go back and sort of bring them back with tshuva. So it is true that your base desire is not a bad guy. It's just that oftentimes before you introduce it to Torah, it's the desire doesn't know where else to go but to desire the things that it sees and feels and touches and hears. Like it's an animalistic desire. But if the whole idea of zos chukas Torah, right? This is the essence of the Torah. That's what it says. This is the principle of all Torah, is to burn that thing down to its core desire. And then once you have that desire, it doesn't have to run into cigarettes. It could run into holy desires, right? You have to just isolate the desire, because the desire is not bad. Again, what is the desire? Rov, Tvuas, B'koach, Shur. It's a powerhouse, that desire. It's stronger than the godly soul. You can get more wheat with the power of the ox than you can the godly soul. The godly soul doesn't know from that desire. It's an earth, it's born from the earth, right? It's an animalistic thing, and it could be brilliant if you can get it on your side. So that same basically desire, when you feel it, and before you want to run out and express it in basically what's called like zar levatala, like wasted seed, you took that desire and just like threw it into something negative, you can harness that seed and make a baby of kedusha out of it, right? It's the same desire. Yeah.
Don't we also go have a mitzvah of owner, which is about harnessing
Right,
that
just
behemoth
said. Yeah.
into Kedusha?
Exactly. It's exactly the same thing.
What's the? I've always wondered what's going on when the red heifer is burned, and yet the very preparation of something which is meant to make you kodesh at the same time makes you into a state of impurity. What's going on there?
Let's not get too far astray. We can talk about that another time. I was answering his question, and we're going to wind up running all over the place. So Kitzer, let's finish Os base. Kitzer, Yivar, this is just like sort of in a line with the whole paragraph we just said was, Yivar inyan karbonos ba'avodas Adam. Cough it up. We can explain the inyan of karbonos, how they do with service of man. As we see, ki yakriv trichlos mikem carbon, right? That when you come close, it has to be from you. And we said there's this fire from heaven, and there's a fire from below, and this is the love of the godly soul, and which hopefully consumes and creates a love out of the animal soul, and the love of the animal soul is caused al yedei hislavshus nefesh elokis b'nefesh bahamas, by the godly soul enclothing itself into it. Let's go on to Os Gimel. Who's memorizing Os Gimel? Ruvi. No, you are. Are you working on it?
Yeah.
All right, you got to really work every day in order to get it there. It's not easy, this task that I put upon you. Okay. If anyone really desires to get into the mitzvah of memorizing, there is An os that opened up. Someone has opened up an os. So os aleph is on the table, and you can even split it with someone because it's a long one.
What's os?
Os is the first chapter, but you got to do it in Hebrew, and you got to do it. You know, you got to put yourself into it. Yeah. All right, we'll talk about it after class. Anyone think about it? Do it. Get your animal in the game. You got one, right? Gimel. All right, here we go. Basi L'gani.
Here we go.
Now we can understand why the Mishkan was made out of Atzei Shitim, which means whatever, acacia wood. Since the main service of the temple, the Mishkan, is Hapcha Chashuch L'Nahor, we've just established the whole concept of Karbanos is to transform darkness into light. So in Avodas Karbanos Canal, like we just said, this is the Avodah of Karbanos, Ubifrat Maisa Ketores. Why does he say this? In particularly the Ketores, the incense. Why does he throw that in there? That's like, we didn't even talk about the incense. He says the whole Beis HaMikdash service was in order to transform darkness into light. We said, you take the inanimate and the growing and the animal, you transform it into a godly thing, take the world and make it into God, transformation, good. Why does he bring the incense all of a sudden?
Because like the guitars have like a pleasing smell. Everyone, it's kind of like comes from desire, like smells.
Even the sacrifice says Reach Nichoach L'Hashem. That's maybe we need more. What is it special about the Ketores that he has to say, especially the Ketores turns darkness into light, and not only that, but it says that the Ketores was one of the most prized services from the Kohanim, that they would make like a raffle to see who got it, and it was like that one you had to get at least once in your life. Like the raffle was pushed aside for someone who never got that particular avoda. It was coveted, right? What's the deal with the Ketores? Anybody?
Does it have to do with any of the ingredients?
It has to do with the ingredients.
Oh, the more.
The more. Tell me about more.
Tell me more. It's kind of stinky, but when you mix it with the.
It's not only stinky. It comes from an unkosher animal. It's the only, like we've been saying, you can only elevate kosher things, right? Because that which is not kosher is banned from the mikdash, right? You can only put those 4 types of kosher animals on the altar. Everything else you can't bring as a sacrifice because you can't elevate everything. That which is gimel klippas of tameas, you have to what? Burn it away. It's not shaykh to elevate. The incense is such a thing that Hashem says, and also there's 11 spices of the incense. The 11 represents sort of the level of keser, which it's a long story, but it goes on the Indian of actually tuma. And the notion is that you can actually bring an unkosher thing and elevate that. So what would that be likened to? It's like Rebbes and special people can take, for example, the Rebbe took the French Napoleon's March, right? Which is essentially, he said France was like one of the most evil countries in the world because of its intense viral anti-Semitism on like a level which sort of rebranded the whole notion of anti-Semitism. For another time we could talk about that. But the Napoleon's March was not just Stama song. It's like their Napoleon himself is what killed the notion of kingship in the world, right? It was the revolution. Can you guys chill? Right? It was basically a revolution against the king for the first time in human history. I don't know if it was the first, but it was the most sort of popular that they sort of rebelled against the notion of having a king. They wanted to like popularize and democratize reality. So really, the Rebbe said it was a war against the king in heaven, right? And the whole notion, they wanted to basically just like stop this notion of having to listen to God. And they sort of popularized that, and it was Napoleon who did it. And this is Napoleon's March. And the Rebbe took this song and Imamish turned it into a Hasidic niggin. So normally we're not told to do that. You can't go take like the latest pop song and just be like, oh, I'm gonna like sing with all the Hasidim and we'll make it holy. You have to like basically not listen to Goyish music, right? But if you have the wherewithal to do it, you can take the deepest klippa and bring it into the Beis HaMikdash and turn it into a sacrifice. So this is what the Ketores was. It wasn't just elevating Klippas Noga, it somehow was able to elevate Gimel Klippas Atameas. In any case, this is the function of the Beis HaMikdash in general, whether it's the regular sacrifices or this ultimate sacrifice of the Ketores, that it turns darkness into light. The Al Yidei Avoda Shebamikdash, through the service of the mikdash. We know, of course, that once the sacrifice was done in the temple didn't just keep its light in the temple, it was the light to all the nations, like we spoke about last night. It was a universal light that everybody knew that there was miracles in the world and there was a God because of this temple. Also, by the way, that's the same for you, right? If you will mamish do the work of making yourself a temple, you're not going to be able to keep that to yourself. It's contagious. Look, the Rebbe just like sat in his office in Brooklyn. The whole world was illuminated with light because of this one. He didn't even mamish travel. He just went from his house, to the mikveh, 770, the Ohel. That was his whole life. And look, every single corner of the world is mamish lit up because of this little circuit that he had. So it doesn't stay in its place. Right? And therefore we're going to hold here. We'll start this up tomorrow. It's a whole nother topic. Mizrat Hashem.
Rav, where does more come from?
It comes from an animal. It's from the skin of an